The other week I talked about the spy balloon situation, and that was like when it first happened before there was other ones found and like all this UFO crazy stuff that apparently happened. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I don't even really know what I'm talking about either. I didn't really look too much into that, but I did cover the initial spy balloon news, particularly because it reminded me of news that I was reading years ago about how China apparently is using westerly winds to offload pollution onto the west coast of the US. So it reminded me of that, and I wanted to talk about the pollution and all that stuff with the news. But now there's this news as of yesterday at 1 p.m., which I just saw this morning. However, since I talked about the spy balloon thing once, I think you might find this interesting. Let's see what they're saying here. From the Independent, with the headline, China calls Ohio train crash Ohio Chernobyl as it mocks U.S. for caring too much about spy balloon. They say the Chinese Foreign Ministry mocked the U.S. on Tuesday for its concerns over an alleged Chinese spy balloon, while a toxic chemical leak from a train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, threatens to become one of the most damaging environmental disasters in the country's history. Scrolling a little bit, you can see a better picture right there. And continuing, we have Hua Shengying, a Chinese government official, a spokesperson apparently for the Chinese Foreign Ministry, saying, apparently, some in the U.S. take a wandering civilian balloon as a big threat, while the explosive train derailment and toxic chemical leak not #Ohio Chernobyl. Plenty of fair criticism to be had about the Chinese Communist Party and how that government runs things in their country. However, they might not be entirely off the mark on this one. Many U.S. citizens are also saying that the news coverage on this topic seems to absolutely be lacking, and many people rightfully question the response from the government and other related officials. Throughout this video, I will also show you other examples with evidence of how the U.S. government poorly handled other disasters that occurred in the country and how that negatively impacted U.S. citizens. The Independent writing, U.S. officials and national media outlets have thoroughly covered the journey of the alleged spy balloon, which the U.S. shot down off the coast of South Carolina on February 4th. Meanwhile, a train derailment has forced residents of East Palestine and surrounding communities to vacate their homes. Chinese officials have denied that the balloon was being used to spy on the U.S., arguing that it was a civilian vessel used mainly to gather weather-related data and which was blown off course by strong winds. Whatever the case, residents of East Palestine and the surrounding communities are dealing with much more pressing matters. Residents have reported that animals have died after being exposed to the toxic chemicals in the air, and chemicals from the crash have also been found in the Ohio River, a primary source of drinking water for millions of people in states including Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. The Environmental Protection Agency said on Monday that it has not detected vinyl chloride or hydrogen chloride in the homes it has canvassed in the area, but the federal government as a whole has appeared relatively slow to respond to the derailment that occurred on February 3rd, just a day before the U.S. shot down the alleged spy balloon. Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation, made his first public comments about the derailment on Monday night in a tweet thread. They give the quote, but they also show the tweet, but it looks like there's multiple tweets. We'll just read the one on the article. He apparently says, I continue to be concerned about the impacts of February 3rd train derailment near East Palestine, Ohio, and the effects on families in the 10 days since their lives were upended through no fault of their own. It's important that families have access to useful and accurate information. Yeah, the thing about that is that the U.S. government has a terrible track record in giving the public useful and accurate information. For example, check this out. I'm familiar with this because I live in LA, so this is one I can cite very easily. This is also just one of the craziest nuclear disasters that has happened in this country at all, though. But you can see here, from 2006, this was written about, but this goes all the way back to 1959. They say, and we're not going to read the whole thing, I just want to give you some information, and you can look more into this on your own if you want. From LOE.org. In 1959, a partial meltdown occurred at the Boeing-Rocketdyne nuclear testing facility about 30 miles northwest of downtown LA. The incident released the third greatest amount of radioactive iodine in nuclear history, but no one really heard about it until Boeing recently settled a class action suit filed by local residents. The plaintiffs complained of nuclear-related cancers and thyroid abnormalities caused by proximity to the facility. Host Steve Kerwood talks to Dr. Arjun Makijani, sorry, who provided scientific testimony for the case, and Bonnie Clea, who was a secretary at the Boeing facility for 11 years following the 1959 incident. Got a transcript of that right here. Check this out. From just last year, 2022, California holds Boeing accountable for cleanup at toxic Santa Susana Field Laboratory. Comprehensive framework sets stage for stringent cleanup of Boeing areas of responsibility at the site. So let me kind of clarify this situation a little bit more, but also let's read what Gavin Newsom, the California governor, says here. Santa Susana Field Lab is one of the nation's most high-profile and contentious toxic cleanup sites. For decades, there have been too many disputes and not enough cleanup. Today's settlement prioritizes human health and the environment and holds Boeing to account for its cleanup. The issue here is This has been going on for about 60 years, and the California government has barely done anything. It seems like, if anything, they're kind of trying to protect Boeing and Rocketdyne. I think Rocketdyne went out of business now that they got bought by Boeing. My knowledge on this whole topic isn't the greatest. As you guys know, I'm not a political commentator. I'm just a dude living my life who happens to live in LA and happens to be familiar with the situation. So, again, if you want to look into this more on your own, you're more than welcome to. But in my opinion, while this is certainly at most the fault of Boeing-Rocketdyne, again, I think the name has since changed, but I guess potentially they were getting some government funding. I don't know. You'd have to look into that more on your own. But while the issue is mostly theirs, the government absolutely did a terrible job in holding them accountable for this, and a terrible job in ensuring that this partial meltdown was cleaned up properly, and therefore also a terrible job in protecting its own citizens from this disaster. Pretty much dropped the ball on all of that. Even back in 2018, not that long ago, there was a massive fire known as the Woolsey Fire, which burned part of that exact location, that Boeing-Rocketdyne lab, also known as the Santa Susana nuclear site. Part of that got burned. And let me just read this for you. This is from LAist.com. The Woolsey Fire, now one of the largest recorded fires in LA County history, has burned a good portion of the former Santa Susana Field Lab, which was once home to several nuclear reactor and the site of numerous rocket tests. The site is still riddled with radioactive waste and other toxic compounds. Many of our audience members want to know if there is a risk of those hazardous materials being spread by the fire. You've reached out to ask. The fire burned the contaminated Santa Susana Field Laboratory, a former nuclear testing site. Who is making sure that air is not toxic? Yeah, good question. Did the radioactive waste at Rocketdyne burn, and what is the status of chemicals at the facility? Is Santa Susana safe? Here's what we know. Public health officials say they found no evidence of discernible radiation in the areas they tested. Still, experts who have studied the site say there are many unanswered questions. I'll give you the general consensus of people that I've seen, like other quote-unquote experts that push back against the government on this one. They suggest that contaminated air did indeed spread, I think it was like northwestbound or just straight up westbound to the Thousand Oaks County region. Let's see what officials said about the risk. On Friday, November 9th at 1:30 a.m., only 11 hours after the fire began, California's Department of Toxic Substance Control issued a statement that said, in part, our scientists and toxicologists have reviewed information about the fire's location and do not believe the fire has caused any release of hazardous materials that would pose a risk to people exposed to the smoke. Tuesday, November 13th, around noon, the DTSC issued an update that said, our staff were able to access the site Saturday morning and assess damage caused by the fire. We confirmed that the SSFL, Santa Susana Field Lab, facilities that previously handled radioactive and hazardous material were not affected by the fire. Does anyone actually believe that they'd be honest about this? Over the weekend, our multi-agency team took measurements of radiation and hazardous compounds, both on the site and in surrounding community. The results from this initial round of testing showed no radiation levels above background levels and no elevated levels of hazardous compounds other than those normally present after a wildfire. DTSC officials did not respond to our request for details about how they reached their conclusions. Yeah, great transparency, right? We asked DTSC what kind of measurements they took, when and where they took these measurements, and what equipment they used. We asked DTSC what data they gathered and if they would share that data. They haven't answered those questions. On Tuesday afternoon, we received an email from Russ Edmondson, a spokesperson from DTSC, that said, the update that we sent is the information that we have at this time. We will post another update on our website under latest news when we have more information. Hirsch has serious doubts about DTSC's methodology and transparency, calling the agency statement public relations pablum. The DTSC has a horrid history of essentially being a captured regulatory agency, captured by the polluters it's supposed to regulate, Hirsch says. On Tuesday, the LA County Department of Public Health said it has conducted its own tests at the request of Supervisor Catherine Barger and found no discernible level of radiation in the test area. Sure. The department said it used radiation detective units, performed nuclide identification, and collected air samples. It also said tests performed by several other agencies, including the California National Guard and Department of Energy, result in similar findings. Why don't they actually release these tests then? If that's what they claim, why don't they actually provide more information on the tests and all that? It's just so shady. And just to give you some more information on how the radioactive waste can be spread, they write, during the fire, there are two primary ways contaminants in the soil can get into the air. Plants and brush suck up pollutants from the soil where when vegetation burns, it releases those contaminants into the air. Some pollutants also exist in the soil in solid form as small particles. When the soil heats up, these solids become gases or they vaporize. It's like putting a pot of boiling water on a stove. When the liquid gets hot enough, it turns to steam. Something like the Woolsey Fire could potentially release substantial amounts of that contamination, according to Hirsch, and those airborne particles will travel as far as the smoke goes. Approximately 500,000 people live within 10 miles of Santa Susana. Dr. Jonathan Samet, the dean of Colorado School of Public Health, has a more optimistic outlook. He says, yes, some materials would likely have been disseminated. The good news is that anything that might be in the smoke is going to be distributed across a very wide area. Is that an optimistic outlook? Oh, don't worry, it's gonna affect more people, but it's a low enough amount that doesn't matter. Okay, great. I don't know if you believe that or not. That means it'll be tough to tell if we're going to see higher cancer rates since so many people have been exposed. Apparently, the science would already indicate that cancer rates are high around the Santa Clarita area where this whole Boeing field lab is. Like, there's already been lawsuits and stuff that people have brought forth about that. So, again, this is a very complicated situation with a lot of details apparently being hidden from the public. And this whole thing's kind of hijacking the main topic about Ohio. I apologize. I'll get right back to that in a moment. I don't want to read all of this. As you can see, this whole Boeing thing, this whole, like, Santa Susana field lab thing is a crazy situation. And by the way, there was like a gas leak around a decade ago in what was the area? Not too far away from this area, which also had a terrible response, and a lot of citizens were apparently negatively impacted from it. I believe they even made a movie about it. So there's like all kinds of like issues when it comes to environmental disasters and how the citizens end up suffering, man. The government might tell you like, oh, we're gonna do our best and we want to provide you accurate information and all that. The fact of the matter is, though, historically, we have seen that they don't really provide that information, and the citizens do suffer. So I'm very concerned for the people in Ohio. I've had this on screen for a little bit. Maybe you read some of it. I'm not going to read any more of this. I do, like I said, I feel a little bit bad for bearing the lead, so to speak, on the Ohio thing. So I'm going to get back to that now. I think you probably see the points I'm making about the government's response in these other situations. And again, let me clarify. I'm not fully blaming the government for this stuff. It was like initially the fault of these companies that made these mistakes. My issue with the government is, well, again, perhaps they received some level of government funding, but I haven't verified that, so we'll leave that point aside. My main issue with the government in these situations is that they'll pretty much lie to the people, saying like, oh yeah, we ensured that this is all safe, don't worry, you'll be fine. Meanwhile, plenty of other experts and other scientific data would suggest that's not the case and that the government is likely lying. So I am concerned that that will be the case with this Ohio situation as well. So let's return to that news. So we left off right here where Buttigieg said that it's important that families have access to useful and accurate information, where I went off on that giant side tangent about how the government's failed to provide such before. Now continuing. Meanwhile, Chinese officials continue to attack the U.S. over its response to the balloon. Newsweek reported that an editorial in the newspaper of the Chinese Communist Party accused the U.S. of reacting in a hysterical manner and letting its response be hijacked by the bitter domestic partisan politics. From news to politics, travel to sport, culture to climate, the Independent. This is the freaking ad of theirs that I'm reading now, isn't it? This is like their outro. That was the end of the article? Now I really kind of feel bad about going off on all the other stuff. I thought there was more to this. Let's see if there's another article we could take a look at briefly here. Here's an article from just 20 minutes ago from the Associated Press. Ohio town takes resident questions on derailment chemicals. The Ohio village, upended by a train derailment and the intentional burning of some hazardous chemicals on board, has invited residents to a town hall. East Palestine, Ohio. We just read that part, actually. Let's skip down to the next paragraph. Lingering questions, there are still plenty. Questions about the huge plumes of smoke, the persisting odors, the reports of sick or dead animals, the potential impact on drinking water, all the cleaning up. Even as school has resumed and trains are rolling by again, things are not the same. In and around East Palestine, near the Pennsylvania state line, people are asking whether the air and water around them is safe for people, pets, and livestock. They want assistance navigating the financial help the railroad offered hundreds of families who evacuated, and they want to know whether it will be held responsible for what happened. Rail operator Norfolk Southern announced Tuesday that it is also creating a $1 million charitable fund to help the community of some 4,700 people while continuing remediation work, including removing spilled contaminants from the ground and streams and monitoring air quality. A quote, "We will be judged by our actions," Norfolk Southern President and CEO Alan Shaw said in a statement. "We are cleaning up the site in an environmentally responsible way, reimbursing residents affected by the derailments, and working with members of the community to identify what is needed to help East Palestine recover and thrive." No one was injured when about 50 cars derailed in a fiery, mangled mess on the outskirts of East Palestine on February 3rd. Dude, I'm sorry I keep messing up. There's so many ads on this website. It's like the most distracting thing ever. You're only seeing one. There's like 5 ads on the side. There's an ad right above it right here. It's ridiculous. Sorry to rant about that briefly, but that's why I'm messing my words up. And this one's like scrolling. I blocked it out a moment ago. Oh my gosh, dude. I apologize. Let me calm down for a moment here and continue reading. As fears grew about a potential explosion, officials seeking to avoid an uncontrolled blast had the area evacuated and opted to release and burn toxic vinyl chloride from 5 rail cars, sending flames and black smoke billowing into the sky again. A mechanical issue with a rail car axle is suspected to be the cause of the derailment, and the National Transportation Safety Board said it has a video appearing to show a wheel bearing overheating just beforehand. The NTSB said it expects its preliminary report in about 2 weeks. Misinformation and exaggeration spread online, and state and federal officials have repeatedly offered assurances that air monitoring hasn't detected any remaining concerns. Even low levels of contaminants that aren't considered hazardous can create lingering odors or symptoms such as headaches, Ohio's health director said. Precautions also are being taken to ensure contaminants that reach the Ohio River don't make it into drinking water. So I clicked the hyperlink about misinformation that they're talking about, and it goes to another article of theirs where they apparently refuted claims, the claim specifically that everyone living in the Ohio River Basin, as shown in the yellow area of a map, should be concerned about the safety of their drinking water after the derailment of a train in East Palestine, Ohio, contaminated the river. AP's assessment, false. The map shows the region of land whose surface water drains into the Ohio River, not the region that gets its drinking water from the river. Many counties in the map get their drinking water from other sources, experts said. Okay. Many, not all. So, oh boy. Look, I'm not going to go read this whole thing. If I keep reading everything in the hyperlinks, we're going to be here all day. And my channel isn't focused on this sort of content to begin with, let alone long form content. I specialize in getting segments briefly explained, right to the point. And as you can see, like, this is almost a never ending thing. We'd be clicking hyperlink and going article to article. So I like to just raise awareness to this mostly. I'm not trying to tell any of you how to live your life, who you should trust, who you should listen to or not. So I'll just speak for my opinion. I personally, if I lived in this region, I'd be very concerned. I would not be trusting what the officials are saying personally. I would not be trusting what the government is saying. I suppose it's good that some of these companies are trying to step forward, and help financially with the families that may be affected. The concern, obviously, is that they're understating the families affected and trying to mitigate and limit their liability. Perhaps that 1,000 should have a zero there. I'm just completely making up a number, right? But you see my point. So be safe out there, guys. Please be safe. Please take care of yourselves and your family. Be well. And wow, crazy world we live in. We talked about China briefly in this video. I gotta say, China may not be entirely wrong on this one. With the U.S. giving more attention to the balloons in this Ohio thing. But, it's China. They're going to do what they can to also make the U.S. look as bad as possible and make China look as good as possible. You know how it is. So I'll leave it there. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you there, plus in the next segment tomorrow.